Okay. Recording has begun. So this is the January 2024 meeting of the Faculty Advisory Committee. Hi all, Happy New Year. Let's begin with approval of the December minutes. The draft minutes are posted on the BOR website if you need to access them quickly right now. And I'll screen share for a little bit, just in case. All right, here they are. Okay. Do we have a motion to approve these minutes?
I'll move.
Okay. And a second.
Second from Jackson.
Okay. Are there any discussion, modifications noted, anything? Okay. Any opposed to approving the minutes as drafted? Any abstentions?
Yes, I abstain because I was in.
Thanks, James.
I abstain also.
Okay. Gotcha, Kat. All right. Thank you. Now on to the agenda. Hold on, I lost it. I had it right in front of me. This always happens. Okay. So approval of the agenda, I can screen share that too if we need, really quickly. Motion to approve it as written.
I'll move it.
Okay, second.
I'll second.
Okay, discussion. Any modifications? Okay. Any opposed or, yeah, any opposed? Okay. Alrighty. So that gets us to the report on December board meetings. And David, I think you have that prepared. Yeah. Go
Right.
ahead.
Although I have otherwise jumped ship,
Uh-huh.
replaced as CCSU rep by the very competent Mark Jackson, who has already begun his tenure by seconding a motion. I congratulate him on that active participation. Nonetheless, I was vice chair for the period when the December meetings were held, and typically I'll report on it. So I've come back to say a few words. Unusually, there were 3 meetings of the board in December. I think that's a record because there are months when they don't meet at all. January, most of the summer, November, and so forth. But I'll briefly talk about the 3 meetings. The first of the meetings was on December the 4th. Interestingly enough, neither Kalina nor I were even informed that it was going to be held. And this was a meeting to which we were not invited, and in fact, explicitly excluded. And this was a meeting called, and I'll read you what they say in their agenda item. This was a meeting called to look at board relationships and functioning. Well, as Kalina and I are actually ex officio members of the board, though non-voting, nonetheless, if you look at the videos of the various meetings, you'll note that we participate quite frequently, even on the view of some of the board members, perhaps excessively. But what they did was to immediately go into executive session, and at 12:32 p.m. on a motion by Regent Bloom, seconded by Regent James, the board voted to go into executive session for the purpose of discussing interpersonal board relationships. That's entirely new. Up to now, executive session has only been to discuss personnel matters, right, related to hiring, salaries, wages of management confidential, or negotiations, contractual negotiations with unions. So this was a first to go into discussing interpersonal board relationships. The board was facilitated by the Association of Governing Boards of Universities and Colleges, AGB. AGB is the premier organization focusing on empowering college, university, and foundation boards to govern with knowledge and confidence. The retreat agenda was prepared by AGB, was facilitated by AGB, and did not include any official business matters over which the BOR has supervision, control, jurisdiction, or advisory power. And that agenda was never made public. So I have made a personal protest to the chair of the board that the faculty ex officio members of the board were excluded. But for example, when it was responded to me, well, it was just for the voting members, I said, but the students were included. The students were present for it. It seems to me contradictory to the notion of improving board relationships to exclude two of the most active participants, at least in discussions at the board, from that meeting. And I leave any further comments to others, but that was the first of the 3 board meetings. The second meeting was on the increase of student tuition and fees by overall 5%. There was some differences of the fees from institution to institution, but that was rather minor. Overall, the point was a 5% increase in tuition and fees. Again, I must say I made I had to bring up an issue, which was the last time we had a tuition and fee increase, which was also, I can't remember the exact details, 3% or 5%, and it was either for the universities or for the community college, but it doesn't matter. At that point, both I and one of the voting members of the board said to the CFO, to the chief financial officer, have you done a study to determine what is the impact of a 5% increase on student recruitment and retention? That seems like a relevant question to discuss when you're increasing the tuition. Does it have a null effect? Does it reduce the number of students who are recruited? Does it reduce the number of students who are retained? What are the consequences of what you're doing? At the previous occasion, at least one voting member of the board had voted against the resolution. Again, at that meeting, the December meeting, I brought the matter up once more. I find it very frustrating, I must say, and somewhat difficult to continually have to interrupt them with obvious things that they haven't done. And if you note a bit of frustration in my voice, I am thoroughly and entirely frustrated. But that said, I am still optimistic that the FAC can forge ahead. At that point, no reaction. And so I said, had I been a voting member of this board, I would have proposed the following amendment. Right? And let me get it if I can. If not, it doesn't matter. I'll recall it from memory. It was that I had asked at the finance committee meeting, the interim vice president for finance and CFO, Lloyd Blanchard, how much money would accrue to the system overall with this 5% increase. And he gave me the figure of $20 million. And so what I proposed at the board meeting, and I did not ask for FAC approval, so this was my own little Don Quixote activity. I said, given that the deficit, which this tuition increase is supposed to help mitigate, is a result of the Students First policy, which was supposed to make the community colleges less expensive and has now resulted in an over $130 million deficit over the next 2 years, and the deficit at Western, largely due to the fact that the board failed to supervise the president at that university, who blew through his reserves and went into deficit year after year. I said, there's an action of commission and an action of omission. The student shouldn't have to pay for this. And what I proposed was that $10 million be taken out of the $99 million reserve that the CT state has, which is the consolidation of all of the reserves of the formerly autonomous colleges, and also $10 million be taken out of the reserve at the system office. There are actually 5 reserves for the universities. Each university has a reserve, Western having blown through almost all of it. But there's also, in addition, a system office reserve of nearly $100 million, at least half of which is available for use. And I said, take $10 million out of that. And in that case, on a one-time basis only for FY25, rescind the 5% increase. I, of course, and I said it twice. I said, would somebody move this as an amendment so we can discuss it? Naturally, blank faces around the table. And the students, one of the student representatives sitting 2 seats from me, simply stared forward. Vote was called, and there was 1 vote against, which was, I believe, Mayor Aaron Stewart of New Britain. 1 of the 2 students abstained. The other voted in favor of the increase in tuition. So that was the December 14th meeting. I think that was the date of it. And that was basically the main issue that was discussed there. For the next meeting.
David, before you move on to the next meeting, I'm not sure whether I missed it, but did you mention also that this, oh no, that's the next meeting. Never mind. Okay, so I'll bring that to the next meeting. But with this one also, did you mention the flexibility expressed at the end of the resolution that seemed to suggest that if the legislature were to fund the system more than was expected, that the percentage of the increase in tuition might be adjusted down?
Yeah, that's an important addition.
Yeah.
Right? This, like the retirement incentive I'm going to talk about, are parts of, the offering that the board and the system office are making to the OPM. And hopefully in exchange, they're going to get sufficient funding to get the system out of the hole for 2025. That's what I think is going on. So yes, there is that. And typically in these resolutions, by the way, the resolution itself doesn't tell you what they've actually done. It simply refers back to a staff report. And in the staff report, they say, what are the numbers?
Right.
And that's a peculiar functioning of a resolution. And it has as an unusual consequence, when a resolution is posted on the state posting board for resolutions, you have no idea what the resolution is really about, because they don't include often the accompanying staff report.
Yeah.
So yes, there is usually in a resolution, and I should have added that, the ability for the chancellor to modify. So they always give themselves that flexibility.
Yeah.
And I think you're right, that this is part, I think, of a negotiation with OPM. That's my conjecture.
Yeah, and I think it was heartening that that I certainly asked, and it was confirmed that that was the sort of motivation for that wording from the chair of the finance committee. And if you don't mind, like just a little bit of commentary, you mentioned that the students, 1 voted for it and 1 abstained, which might be surprising to us. I'd say that I do know that a lot of thought went into it, at least on, there's at least one of them thinking very, very deeply about this and feeling very torn. And what impressed me about that process is what a burden this is on the students, because they do feel that we are in a bind and they feel responsible for picking up the slack in a way that the state has not felt responsible and has not acted and picked up the slack. And it's precisely that imbalance that I think, it's happening on so many levels, not just on the financial level, but even just in this way that student representatives feel that they need to do more than the state is willing to do. So I found that unfortunate that we're placing that burden on the students. And I'll also note that with that flexibility, legislative session starts on February 7th, and one of the huge difficulties with this is that it has nothing, that the possibility of that extra funding is less about willingness to fund higher ed at this point, and requires a much more difficult hurdle, which is a willingness to modify at least some of the fiscal guardrails, certainly the spending cap. And that has been a subject of real debate, and people have expressed some reservations about keeping it as it is, but there certainly isn't enough momentum yet to suggest that that will happen. So that is going to be a huge hurdle going forward. So while that's there, the fight is not just about higher ed funding, but also about these fiscal guardrails. So
Yeah, and it placed the students in a situation of conflict of interest. They are in fact voting. Well, they're allowed to vote on the modifications to their curriculum, and they also end up voting on their tuition and fees. It is an unusual situation. Are there other comments about that? Thanks, Kalina. That puts it in a broader perspective. The next meeting was an additional meeting, and that was on the retirement incentive, right? We had learned about the possibility of such an incentive in a November meeting that we had with Lloyd Blanchard, who brought up that that was something they were discussing with the OPM, with the Office of Policy and Management. But we didn't hear anything further about that until the Saturday preceding this additional December meeting, which was, I think, December the 14th, or perhaps the 18th. I can get the exact date here. It was December the 18th. So there was a meeting on the 14th, and then a second meeting on the 18th. Right? And meeting on the 18th was for the presentation of the proposal from the system office for a retirement incentive, which would be offered to faculty and staff. That would include also management confidential and non-union employees, any employee of any institution in the system over age 60 and with at least 10 years of service. And the proposal was either $30,000 as a lump sum or 1% taken in addition, multiplied by their number of years of service, times their pension average salary, i.e. the average of their highest 3 years. Right? So that could extend it by $10,000 or even $15,000 for some individuals who had been 20, 30, or perhaps even more years of service. That was made available the Saturday preceding the meeting, which was either on a Wednesday or a Thursday. I can't recall now offhand. At that point, Louise Williams from the AUP had circulated a memo indicating that the union had not really been consulted or informed, except a few days before the issuing of this resolution. And I had that read into the minutes of the meeting, right, because I thought that was important. One of the things that we have tried to do and failed to do is to get the system office to communicate and consult. That's not hard, right? C and C, communicate. But what they want is command and control. It's also C and C, but it's a rather different conception of things. And so that was important because otherwise people are taken by surprise. They don't know what are the consequences of what is happening. And justifiably, they're going to ask, questions about it. Now, there's a February 1st deadline for the unions to sign on to this. This is a matter which requires union approval, except for the management confidential and non-unionized staff, whoever they might be. And so that's a situation which we have now. I'm going to stop for a second and just say, I did say at the meeting that the staff report was slightly better than usual, in the sense that it did indicate the number of eligible employees at each institution, the 4 universities, Charter Oak, and CT State. And it did indicate as well the question of savings depending upon refill rate. Now, they use the term backfill. So I just mentioned in passing that I thought that was a little derogatory. I didn't mind a more neutral term, refill, but I didn't really consider, replacing faculty as backfill, which I think is used when you're digging a ditch and you're filling it up afterwards. And so I think it's important to note that what is in the actual resolution is the following statement. System office will collaborate closely with the individual institutions regarding the backfilling of positions that become vacant as a result of the program. And the staff report includes the savings at 25% refill, I'll use that term, 50%, 75%, and 100%. Right. Obviously, at 100%, the difference is, and Brendan, I suppose, can speak to this after me, is the difference between the salary of a faculty member retiring at the top of the scale and hiring someone at the entrance level to replace them. So there's a saving no matter what is the rate of refill. The other point that needs to be made is that they say regarding the backfilling of positions that become vacant as a result of the program, such decisions will be unique to each CSCU institution. So this is clearly not an object in terms of this resolution for a negotiation as a whole or across the board. Will be unique to each institution and dependent on their respective priorities and fiscal health. But that's something that I suppose we need to mention as well, because the fiscal health, i.e. the deficit or surplus of the 6 institutions varies. It goes from a high at CCSU with an over $10 million surplus to Eastern, which has a break-even and slight surplus, to Southern with a slight deficit, to Western with a considerable deficit of at least $30 million. And then it goes over to CT State with a 2-year deficit in $130 million, and Charter Oak, which is balanced. So there's a considerable difference in the fiscal health of the 6 institutions. And, I think it's an implication of this that refill rates, to be determined initially by the institution, are going to have to also take into account the surplus or deficit of each of the institutions. And then they continue, the focus will be on achieving financial savings while ensuring that positions necessary for the institution's success are refilled. So that does give the perspective, and that was approved as part of the resolution. So that's not in the resolution. So if you look in the resolution, you don't see that. You just see the usual flexibility of the chancellor to make some modifications. You have to go back to the associated staff report in order to get the details. So I think I'll stop there.
May I add just a little bit?
Go on.
Did you mention that this was not reviewed by or approved by the Finance and Infrastructure Committee before it came
Yes.
to the board?
Thank you. No, it was not. And that was one of the things that I noted in my presentation at the board meeting. And I think that's also the late information being made available to at least some of the unions. So at least one union had sufficient advance notice to actually approve it.
Mhm.
Other unions received the information literally less than a week before the resolution came before the board.
Mhm.
I should also note that the monies for the lump sum, right, or the percentage payment don't come out of institutional budgets. It comes out of money which has been held back at the system office level, and I think, but I could be wrong on this, from money not expended from ARPA and from state COVID funds.
I think that's right. Yeah, and I'll just say, like, not only it was not approved by finance, which was unusual. There are a lot of things about the meeting that were unusual. I mean, there was a board meeting on the 14th, and then on that Friday, was that the same day? Then on that Friday at 5 p.m., notification to board members of this meeting on the following Monday went out, and then it went out publicly that Saturday morning. So it was very, very fast. And then at the beginning of the meeting, I think someone asked, Mayor Stewart asked Chancellor Chang to just sort of note the sort of basic facts and timeline of the incentive or the program, let's call it, for the record, right? Just so that it would be on the meeting recording. Well aware that it was in the staff report. And he said something to the effect of that would be decided, but it was right there, as David pointed out. The summary on the staff report was really concise and really informative. It was a notably good staff report. So it all just seemed like everything was happening very quickly. Unfortunately, only the last 12 minutes of the meeting were recorded, so you won't be able to see all of the discussion. And I'm not sure it's recorded that, it didn't go through finance, etc. So, that's what happened. I did point out, as David says, refills would have to be determined based on the financial health of each institution. And at CT State, the struggle has been for quite a long time now, one of understaffing. And we have just come out of, between sometime in 2018 and July 1st of 2023, Carrie Kelly will tell us that $34.5 million were saved by simply not refilling vacated positions, the strategic attrition. So we have already undergone a lot of this, but then based on the current, financial health of the institution, it would be a struggle to get these positions refilled. So, I mean, that really could be catastrophic at CT State if, in fact, one, this is approved, and two, if it actually functions as an incentive, which I'm not clear on, and Brendan, you're about to present on it, so hopefully that'll help us get a little bit clearer.
Yeah, let me add just before Brendan. Just like, in that resolution on the mitigation measures for the deficits, they talked about a comprehensive academic program review. And that was not in fact, what happened. It
Right.
was something less. It was an inventory of programs that exist and some financials, depending upon whether you use the program or the departmental basis.
Mhm.
And then some proposals for new programs, but it wasn't what they said. And again, this is probably not what they said. Whether it's an incentive, that means that people who are not planning to retire at all of a sudden wake up on the day after the board meeting and say, oh boy, I'm going to get $30,000 for leaving a job which is paying me $120,000, right? And I can't imagine, and that's one of the things I told Blanchard when we met. I said, I don't think that's going to be an incentive. I think that's going to be a bonus
Mhm.
for those who have already decided to retire. And I imagine anybody who decided to retire in December is going to be unhappy because they're actually not eligible for this particular incentive turned into a bonus. So I think that's a point to be made. And secondly, we discussed this at the steering committee of the CCSU Senate. And the consensus was that this is the right of faculty who have already planned to retire to get some bonus in addition, if that's what the board actually wants to do. But that we have to make sure that the question is the refill rate and how it's refilled. And that's where shared governance has to come into play. It's useless to turn down, and I hope that none of the unions do turn down this offer, because they would be, in effect, not representing part of their faculty, and in fact, on the argument of some, engaging in age discrimination, depriving those faculty who happen to be age over 60 of a benefit which has been offered to them. That said, the important thing is the refill rate, and that will be institution by institution, right? So, for example, yes, Kalina, when you talk about CT State, it's really important that the unions, the two unions there, AFT and 4Cs, as well as whatever governing structure is now in place, are able to meet with BNUCO and discuss before submitting the refill plan what is needed. And that's what we're proposing for CCSU. We're proposing that the president of the university, the provost, if approved, this resolution, I'm not sure that it's going to be approved, but I expect it probably would be, along with the chair of the curriculum committee, the chair of the UPBC, University Planning and Budget Committee, meet with the president in order to collectively decide upon a refill rate and the specifics of those refills. So I think that there's two aspects to it. There's one, recognizing the rights of faculty to get a benefit, which accrues to them because of their particular circumstances. And number two, the question of shared governance with respect to the refill. But anyways, I'm sorry, I interrupted you, Brendan.
No, well, before we go to the next item, I just want to, well, first of all, I just want to say that I don't think we have to be concerned that unions are not representing. They are, in fact, my belief is, engaging in some sort of negotiation, as is the agreement. So that's ongoing. But before we go to the next item, usually we would have called this reports of the chair and vice chair, but we're in a bit of a liminal space that we'll talk about when we get to the elections process. So I'll just follow up on a couple things that I had from last month that I was supposed to report out on.
Colleen, can I just interrupt for a second? I
Yes.
interrupted Brendan before he was able
Oh,
to speak because he's done
sorry.
a calculation. He's done, so maybe we should have Brendan's point of view.
Well,
Okay, go on.
that's the next item on the agenda.
Is it? Okay, sorry. Then
But were you
may I
going to say
retire from
something,
discussion?
Brendan?
No, I can hold off and talk about it in a minute. That's fine.
Okay. So just very briefly, two things. We had passed a resolution opposing the tuition increase, which was read into the record at the meeting at which the tuition increase was approved. And since then, the CT State Senate met and unanimously endorsed our resolution on tuition. And it's my understanding that, that I believe the message on this has really been making its way around the state to legislators, et cetera. So that's good. And then the other thing is that we had planned to have some report back about how our refugee policy was being implemented and who it applied to, and if it was effective during the current conflict. There have been some shifts, it seems, at the system office, so that is getting in the way of smooth reporting back about that. That's all I'll say there. Hopefully we can get something like that by November 9th. So just those things, just so that they're not left hanging.
Can I interrupt one last time?
Uh-huh.
I had forgotten about the refugee policy. Thank you for bringing it up again. What originally we had proposed was that refugees from Ukraine,
Mhm.
right, be given free tuition and fees and so forth. And it came back from the system office enlarged to include refugees from all conflict zones.
Yeah.
So it would be, I think, important as well to add at this point the Israel-Gaza conflict,
Mhm.
where if you've followed it, the latest numbers that I've seen is that the IDF have killed 97 professors at Gaza universities and destroyed each and every one of them. There is not a building left for a student in Gaza to go to university.
Yeah.
I think that's also going to be important to know what are the measures being taken, if any, to assist refugees from Gaza. Now, they're in a situation where, of course, they can't get out of Gaza, but this is something to look forward to in the future. So I would just add that we need to ask about the Middle East conflicts as well.
Yeah. And I would say that, in developing, I feel like folks at the system office were forward thinking enough to make the language very general that it should apply. What I'm not clear on is who's currently implementing it and making sure, there had been some really good relationships made between different state agencies to make sure that we were all communicating well and able to serve those students. I don't know that has been sustained. So, just it would be really nice to hear whether it had been and to see if there's anything we need to do to support. So, okay. Anything else before we get off of item 3 and move on to the RIP analysis? Okay, Brendan, all you.
All right, thank you. I did put together just two slides. And I'm, rather than sort of walking through the individual calculations in the document I circulated to the committee, I just thought I would kind of highlight some of the key points in what I put together there. And hopefully, I don't know if you can see my slides.
Yep.
Okay. So, yeah, there's been a lot of conversations about this proposed retirement incentive program, in part because it does mean a great deal to a number of faculty members, financially, and that's something everyone takes very seriously. Also, it's fairly unprecedented. There's some confusion over the last time something like this came through on our campuses, but it's at least 10 or more years since it's happened. And I think there's just been a little confusion about how this process should play out. So I guess the first thing I wanted to just mention is that a program like this is a mandatory subject of bargaining with unions, and there was no bargaining before the board passed it. That's a weird way to bargain, I guess. And we are now underway bargaining on this particular issue. One of the bargaining points involves the refill rate that David was talking about. I do have a little bit of a difference of opinion about whether the level of reserves or the financial condition of a campus should determine whether faculty are refilled. We actually have campus by campus breakdowns, discipline by discipline, of the number of eligible participants potentially. And there's a real concern that gen ed requirements on certain CSU campuses could get hit pretty heavily by retirements. And, that's something that impacts every student that is there. And it's not clear that should, avoiding that should depend upon the overall financial condition of an institution. In fact, I'm going to talk in a second about how the cost of actually 100% refill is not that great on a campus by campus basis. But in any event, the alleged goals of this program are to reduce spending on labor on our campuses. And the question is, with students paying 5% more to attend, we are potentially seeing some quality impacts of reducing the number of our most experienced faculty on our campuses. So when you take those two things together, asking students to pay 5% more for arguably less experienced faculty on average in the classroom, the question we should ask ourselves is, does this reduce our competitiveness as campuses? And does this just sort of perpetuate this cycle we're in of like struggling to recruit students, financial problems, cutting, raising costs, struggling to recruit students? I just mentioned this question about whether there are fields of study that will have no or very few faculty left. I've mentioned a number of times, I probably sound like a broken record on this, but the finance discipline on my campus has not had a tenure track faculty member for at least 2 years now. We're trying to recruit this year, but of course, recruiting into a finance field without having a finance PhD on your faculty is not easy. That's a situation that should be avoided if it can be. There's another question of the impact on mentoring of junior faculty if departments are hollowed out, and the service burden is sort of fixed on our campuses, right? The committees have head counts that need to be filled, and so that fixed cost gets spread over fewer and fewer people. The workload per tenured faculty member starts to go up pretty quickly, right? And the reality is that the FTEs across all the CSU campuses increased by 0.5% this year, right? So the narrative we've heard quite a bit from OPM and others is that the number of students is lower, so you don't need as many faculty. Well, that's just not true. The most recent enrollment report for the CSUs, again, has us up 0.4%. And so if the plan is to reduce faculty, the remaining faculty will face additional workload in aggregate. So, in light of those observations, I think it is wise actually to guarantee 100% tenure line refills for every participant who does take up this offer. That would reduce the loss of competitiveness, right? Because then actually you would have tenure line faculty, dedicated tenure line faculty falling in place. They will not have the same level of experience of those who retire, but they will gain that experience over time. It'll prevent the hollowing out of departments in the long run, because you will be able to sort of recruit with people who are in that field down the road. It's going to protect the service activity of faculty. If we do have tenure line faculty who come in place, because then you have more people sort of pulling on the oars.
Yes.
And it would reduce the workload impact from loss of tenure line faculty. So as I said, the labor cost net will still go down at 100% refill rate if this RIP goes through. I calculate 12.74 million in total over 3 years from the CSUs. I should say that I've not extended this analysis to CT State just because I don't have as much understanding of their contract. A 0% refill only saves around $553,000 more per year per campus. And that's a lot of money in some sense, but whether or not that would determine the financial viability of a single campus is doubtful to me. That's 3.89 management confidential positions at their average salaries. And the other alternative would be to fund that a little bit out of reserves. So that's just my observation on this. I do think we could actually potentially get to a point where it's closer to a win-win-win for everybody. But coming out the gate and saying you're not going to negotiate X, Y, or Z, or you're not going to negotiate at all, makes it difficult to reach that point of win-win-win. And the important thing is not to ascribe a failure or a breakdown in this bargaining to any particular party, particularly when some party may or may not be bargaining in good faith. So I will stop there. That's what I had on that. If anyone has any questions or comments or suggestions for revision, I'd be happy to look at them.
I think Mary has a hand up.
Hi, yeah, I have a quick question. So I'm the new alternate from Central. David forgot to mention that. Yesterday at our faculty meeting, Steve Cohen brought up a really good point that you would get this whole idea of guaranteeing the refill, but you can't guarantee it specifically to a department. So I just wanted to confirm, is that accurate? So let's say we lost 3 English professors to retirement, and Central guaranteed that they would retain those 3 tenured lines, but they wouldn't necessarily go to the English department. Is that accurate?
It's bargaining, right? So if management agrees to do it and allocate, discipline by discipline, 1 for 1, then they agree to do it, and it's the result of the bargaining. If management walks away from the table, then, bargaining is broken down, but that's not the fault of the faculty. And, again, it's we wouldn't even be here bargaining if we had acted too quickly and not talked to our lawyer about labor law and the fact that this is a mandatory subject of bargaining. So, I think different people have different perspectives. I've heard some of the things President Toro has said about Central, and it does seem like the situation is looking brighter there in terms of overall level of refill potentially, but it's a process, and I don't think February 1 is actually our deadline because the signups go till end of April, I believe. So I think hurry up would have been preferred by certain parties in this bargaining process, but I don't think it's as urgent as maybe they make it seem.
Anyone else? Mark?
Yeah, just to expand on that, it actually, at CCSU at least, the practice has been for the last 3 or 4 years that all open factory lines return back to the provost office and are then negotiated by the different schools. So what Mary you're describing has actually been the actual practice. But yeah, I don't think that's something that's like written anywhere. That's just the practice that's been in place for the last few years.
Thanks, Brendan. That was really helpful. I just want to, reiterate or emphasize something that you said, which is that it's our understanding that all affected unions are in fact engaging with management. So that is happening. But also how I want to mention how strange, and I think you mentioned this too, the process has been to bring something to the board that is a mandatory subject of bargaining before not even it's bargained, but even mentioned officially to any of these unions. So, there's something very odd going on here. Certainly, the system wants credit for having pushed this rather aggressively. The timing was also unfortunate, given that it was released right before Christmas with 1 month to get this done. So I think everybody is stepping up and doing as much as they possibly can to make this work out for everyone. There can be a win-win-win. It's just, is everybody invested? David?
Yeah, Brendan, do you have any estimate as to what percentage increase of faculty or staff retirements would occur due to this initiative, other than those which would ordinarily occur? Because I mean, some people are going to retire no matter what.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And I think there's been some conversations with people who have seen these kinds of proposals come out. And I don't know, I think the range is anywhere between 10% to 50% of those eligible, which is a pretty wide range. But, I do agree, one alternative for anyone looking at this would be just to teach one more semester, earn potentially similar or more, and that counts towards your pension. So I don't know how strong this incentive is really, but, circumstances differ person by person. So for some people, well, actually, yeah, there have been inquiries suggesting people would view this as a nice way to accelerate departure. I'll put it that way. But yeah, it is an unknown, and it's difficult to figure out in a lot of different ways. I forgot to mention too that AAUP's council did vote overwhelmingly in favor of bargaining this. The ballot options were say yes, say no, and bargain, and well more than a majority voted to bargain it. That's another illustration of why we couldn't plausibly, sort of respond to this immediately one way or the other, because we run our unions democratically. We have representatives from our campuses who weighed in with leadership and said, bargain this thing. And so that's where we are right now.
All right. Anything further? I guess, I've been not clear on what to make of this, and what motivations are. I will just say, since David has brought it up and we are talking about Lois's comment is funny, right? It's not clear. If it's not clear that this is a significant incentive, then it really has very little bearing on deficit mitigation. And it is an odd thing to decide to do in the middle of declaring some sort of fiscal emergency. And I just can't for the life of me understand what it is. I begrudge no one a retirement bonus. Wonderful for you. I just don't understand both the system and OPM's investment in this use of money at this time. It's it's odd to me, and I hope we understand something deeper about it. All right, shall we move on? Draft report to the legislature?
Oh boy, it's me again. Are
It's
you going to be tired of listening to me?
never.
May I promise not to do this ever again, except as a guest? Perhaps if you give me emeritus status, I'll just be happy to come and attend meetings. So under section 185, we're obliged to give a report to the committees of the legislature concerned with public higher education on a yearly basis. The board, for example, is supposed to give a report on how it is maintaining the distinct missions of the colleges and universities, which I don't think they've done since 2011. But we have certainly gave a report last year, 2022, and Colina has circulated the report that we've written for this year. Maybe I can start to share it and we can take a look. If I can figure out how to share. I'm hoping that you're seeing it. So basically we said, let's do it in 5 pages. And also let's make it extremely clear, because this is something we want to shop around, as it were, or circulate around to members in the legislature, to members in the executive branch, to administrators at our universities, to express the serious concerns we have about, let me put it this way, the isolation and dysfunction of the system office and the incapacity of the board to fulfill its statutory obligations. I think that's putting it most succinctly and accurately. So what we have here is a little preamble. And then the first question is, did the 2011 merger into one system fulfill its mandate as stated in section 185 to respect the distinct missions? And of course, the answer is no. They have not reported on that. And that's important because there are different conditions obtaining in the colleges and universities. The CT State College has open admissions. The universities have a mildly selective admission procedure. Charter Oak has yet a third admission procedure, because they are to a large extent completing degrees of students who have accumulated credits at various previous institutions. There's a difference between policies that should be directed to associate's degrees and those to bachelor's, master's, and for that matter, the number of doctoral degrees, which some of the CSU universities are now offering. Number 2, we point out that the one thing that they should have done in terms of the relationship between the colleges and universities were the transfer articulations. And that had been largely abandoned as of 2017, as they moved on to the students first and consolidation of the community colleges. So that's the second point of criticism. The second question is, has the consolidation of the community colleges achieved its objective of cost savings of the state, greater equity and better services to the students? I need not specify all the problems that we have identified at various meetings of this board, but we focus on 2 of them, namely, the answer of course is no. The answer is the significant debt of the community college, which is now around $130 million for the next period of the biennium. And also the, and we'll point out some of the reasons for this, namely hiring of 170 odd GPAs, advisors, on soft money with no perspective of how to pay them as of 2024. Hiring 6 area deans who do we know not what at the community college level. Never mind the 3 regional presidents, which amazingly enough are still being paid in 2024, even though their positions were more or less abolished something like 2 years ago. We also mentioned in terms of the students, the fact that when they consolidated the over 400 programs into 100 or so-called aligned programs, they didn't do a teach out. And when DegreeWorks, the software program, was not updated, so that their credits from equivalent courses were not transferred, and the students then find that they thought they had 6 credits to do, and now they have 18 credits to do. That was a shock, and that's now having to be done manually by those advisors. Secondly, the situation with respect to the completion of courses and program of study, which Colina has already talked about, so I'm not going to go back on that, but that reduced their federal funding largely because they hadn't considered that, unlike the universities where we have majors, minors, and general education, and therefore a course is pretty well always in some program of study, there was only the concentrations or majors at the community colleges. And thirdly, the notices of dismissal, which were not for Colina. I think that the leadership of the community college would not even have known were being sent out to students in August, dismissing them when they had more than $500 of owing to the CT state.
I would not put it that strongly, but yeah. we
If
can
you have a
talk about it.
modification to the terminology, let me know.
Yeah.
I have it here. that
There's a
just-
causality implied there that I don't know that I want to assert, but yes, it was temporally after my intervention. I don't know if it was because of my intervention.
I will modify that.
Thank you.
Let me mark it down here. Okay. The third one was has the leadership of the system, president, now chancellor, and his executive staff, been able to propose and lobby for sustainable state funding, especially for FY25? Well, I need not say that the answer here is no. And we point out that the CSU 2030 was inflated and was not able to achieve a reasonable increase in baseline funding for, especially for 25. And we give some examples of it. The proposed doubling of block grants in a mere 2 years. Now, when we met with the board at one of our joint meetings, a number of us talked about an 8 to 10% increase to the baseline budgets per year for the rest of the next 10 years. They wanted to do this in 2 years. And the likelihood of that being rejected was extremely high. And in fact, 100%, because that's what happened. So sometimes when you overreach, what you get is underfunding. And that's exactly what happened here in reaction. That's not to justify what the OPM did, but that is to say that that's the kind of asking for too much and getting too little, which has occurred here. And we mentioned also the exaggerated budget for new buildings, 2 examples of that, etc. 4, has the CSU broken with the culture of isolation and dysfunction characteristic of the previous system administration, including suspicion and distrust of faculty and staff? The answer again is no. And this despite the one positive aspect, which was the meetings that Colina and I were having with the provost. We did this on a monthly basis. I think we had some frank and honest discussions. He indicated some of the priorities he had. We brought at least one of the issues here to the FAC, which was the form for comprehensive program review, and brought back to him the information that we got from our meeting. But that individual has now been, I'm not sure exactly what the term is no longer in his function, has been dismissed, or whatever else has happened to him. And that has broken the one link that we did have with the system office, even though the results were more conversational than actually practical. But we add here other examples of the basic disrespect that the system office has and is reflected in some of the aspects of board functioning. First of all, we've had the repeated request to have an agenda item at board meetings for the FAC. We are in the statutes a committee for the board. All of their committees of the board have regular reports, and if we have a resolution, we should be able to report it as well and not go through the provost's office or somebody else who sends it over to the staff at the system office, and then it comes back as something different or not at all. Secondly, the December 4th meeting, which I mentioned, where the board met in executive session to discuss board relationships, to which we were not invited. Thirdly, there's a regular report, a monthly report, which is now being issued by the Vice Chancellor for System Affairs and Chief of Staff to inform board members of what's going on and what's coming. It's pretty anodyne. I would say it's kind of plain vanilla, but neither Colina nor I get a copy of it. Right? Just plain disrespect. And finally, the meeting with the NCHEMS group doing the OPM study of the system, which was proposed to us by the system office at a time when they knew or should have known that the colleges and universities were not in session and faculty were not available to attend. Kalina can say more about this because I know that she's asked to have it rescheduled, but I don't believe that we've heard back from the system office. Fifth question, can the problems of the board and the system office be resolved within the existing framework? And our answer is no. We believe that the problems described above cannot be solved by further minor adjustments to the system and BOR, right? And point out that the problem is not just the individuals involved, or even primarily, but rather the isolation and dysfunction of the system office and the fact that the board, to a large extent, slightly improved lately, but not by much, has been complacent in approving and rubber stamping whatever the system office sent to it. And that's the resolutions that we just discussed. And so examples of that, we have at least 4 examples of that. Those are mentioned already in the report on the December meeting, so I won't repeat it. We also mentioned the board is dependent upon the system office not only for major policy resolutions, but also for its data and information. It has only one source of information, namely the board, and it has no independent way of assessing or criticizing that information that it receives. And finally, we mentioned that the system office itself deducts its expenses from the overall grant from the legislature without any further explanation, and has modified the way it distributes the remaining block grants to the universities in particular without making it public. So the question is, can we take measures to resolve these problems? Well, maybe I'll stop here and get comments and then come to this further question of some proposals that we would like to make. I can't see if there's anybody who has their hand up. So Kalina, let me know if there is. If not, I'll just continue on.
I'm checking. I don't see any hands. But I'll make a comment or
Yes, go ahead.
So the effort here was to be brief, and I like the structure, and I think that there are a lot of, this is fairly comprehensive. There are a lot of things in here that need to be in here. I'm going to simply comment on some things that I hope they are implicit in here, but are conveyed more strongly when we are talking about this or circulating this. And, one is this: when we talk about the distinct missions of the colleges and universities, etc., it is not just that their distinctness has been neglected, their missions have been both neglected and undermined. We see this very clearly when we talk about open enrollment institutions like the community college, where we've been fighting for years to counteract policies that would actively just kind of eject certain students, the very students that we are solely placed to serve, from our doors. So I think that partly, but the mission. The other thing was that when we talk about the system office deducting its own operating expenses, this is more than a financial issue. It's a structural incoherence in the system that undermines operations on many levels. I would say, I think at the community college, we are most affected by the shared services model. And
Yes.
what you find is that supposed leaders of institutions, and I'm gonna hope to share a concrete example with us at another time. I want to make sure that the person responsible is fine with me sharing it, but where the supposed leaders of institutions do not have the power to direct certain just day-to-day and essential operations of the institution, and it undermines the academic integrity of those institutions. So the fact that the block grant is administered by the system office, and then these services are administered by the system office, we still don't know what the pay structure is, but also they're not, it undermines the actual independence of these institutions. So I think that is something that we're going to have to talk about. And the other element of structural incoherence is when you talk about the no independent source of information. That's serious. And at some point we should talk about a solution to that. But anyway, that's it.
Okay, thank you, Kalina. Yeah, so there's three things that you want added. One, the temporality issue with respect to the CPOS and the letters of dismissal. I will add that. Secondly, on the distinct missions, that it's the missions, not merely distinct that hasn't been respected, but the missions are being undermined.
Mhm.
And thirdly, the question of shared services. Yeah,
Mhm.
that's important to add. So if we now go on, again, I'm assuming there's no one else.
David, I did have one.
Yes, go ahead, please.
I do think that what's been happening at Eastern with respect to the presidential search
Ah, yes.
is very illustrative of 1 and 4 in your lists. Eastern Senate passed a resolution saying we want campus visits for candidates. You know, I think that was actually a pretty standard thing across different campuses, but you could view that very much as the local community saying this is the way we want to do our presidential search uniquely. But the board has one new policy of no campus visits. There was no response to that, and now things are escalating with this proposed vote of no confidence resolution in the chancellor. And we are right now living with the consequences of, you know, inadequate respect to the distinct mission of the universities, as well as the culture of isolation and dysfunction. Because I have had a lot of conversations about this resolution of no confidence, and a lot of it is driven by suspicion and distrust. And there was no response to the campus Senate resolution expressing concerns over how the presidential search was unfolding. So that is not resolved yet. I don't know if if we include it in this report, but I just wanted to offer that as more support for the points you make.
I think we should include it. So I will add a note because that's really an essential thing. There was no public meetings with the three finalists for CSCU president. And they're trying now to impose that same model, but it's quite different because one was a sort of head of a system, as it were. The other is your chief executive officer of the university, and that is a local affair, not a system-wide affair. So I will certainly add that. I think it can be added in the section 4. So I'll add that as a further point. Others? Okay, that leads us just with the question of, well, if we make a criticism.
Lois, I had my
Oh,
hand raised.
Lois, go ahead.
Under your item 2, where it talks about the consolidation, community college consolidation,
Yes.
I think something needs to be added about the fact that taking away the ability of the local colleges to make informed decisions to support the students in the community that college has served for many years and to use funds in a manner that would best serve students, faculty, and staff is a huge issue. And now, what decisions that used to be made locally with students and now take days to resolve. And as far as spending money locally, we have a building that's about to fall apart and collapse, and we've been closing classrooms because water is seeping through into the classrooms. And I just looked at a couple of them today, and nothing is being done, nothing.
Mhm.
We're attempting to put Band-Aids in something that no longer can Band-Aids no longer work. That's all we can do.
And that's at which college, you know? Could just for that's at the I'll add that in section 2 as a
Norwalk.
further point. That local.
That's Norwalk.
Could you, yeah, Norwalk. Could you
No,
send me
this is,
the
I think, a
formulation you
system
just
issue,
said?
local decision-making on every level.
Mhm.
Making decisions to support the students and the community that the college has served for many years, and to use funds in a manner that would best serve students, faculty, and staff, like fixing a building.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And, you know, and this is a long story, right? There was, you know, the
Yeah.
events at Nantucket, at Middlesex, there's so many places that are dealing with this.
Okay.
Yeah, I was gonna add that for us not talk too,
Mm.
because we had like our building. We literally like, I remember like last semester, before Thanksgiving, they literally had to like shut it down for like 2 weeks,
Mhm.
and then they were giving instructors like options to either have your classes on, like online or something like that. And then like for the lab, they were moving it like in a different place, especially like every time there is rain, we have to deal with like flood, the auditorium. So yeah, that's something that
Where
is
is that?
happening as
At
non-talk.
Nantucket.
But I don't know, but they were making steps and plans to fix them. So usually they send us like daily report of what's happening. But again, like Lois says, it's more like putting band-aid into things. So
Mhm.
Yep.
but yeah, our president and our staff are taking steps to, to do the best they can. But I feel like it's something that is out of their hands or something like that.
Mhm. And if I remember correctly, right before that, and which probably could have been handled if things were maintained well, there had been some cosmetic improvements, but none of the sort of structural stuff that had been longstanding issues as Nantucket, which speaks again to the local input.
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else? So that's the fourth edition.
I don't know if you can see my hand.
Hey, Linda.
Yes.
Yes, just one thing, because it was brought up last meeting and it's in this report. I know that there was an approval of 5% tuition and fees for most of the colleges, but I do want to remind you that it was not all the colleges, that Charter Oak held steady on our tuition and fees for yet another year. We haven't raised them, I don't know the exact number of years, but we held steady again and did not raise them again this year. So it wasn't all
Yeah.
the colleges.
I'll note that.
Thanks, Linda.
Jonathan? I think you're muted.
Sorry. Yeah, I was muted, and for a second I forgot where the mute button was. I don't know if this is the place to add this, but there are a number of other issues and big issues that are, I think, affecting the community colleges with the structural incoherence that you're addressing in this report. And one is the what's become kind of the competition and cannibalizing of each other's sections, pitting large campuses against small campuses, and the inevitable push towards more and more online classes, which aren't necessarily bad online classes, but there is no, as far as I'm aware, there's no structural strategy for maintaining a commitment to traditional modalities. And the reason there are a number of reasons that's important, but one of the reasons is that we could end up eviscerating the meaning of community and community colleges. If everything's online, um, we do away with our mission to have local community-based campuses that are vibrant parts of those communities. And in Northeastern Connecticut, especially, I think with just speaking locally, Quinnebog, plays an important part of adding a cultural presence as well as educational opportunity. So, so that's important. And the other thing that leads to is faculty without full loads. And so we have, I was joking with a colleague, we're all going to become college career success professors, because we don't have full loads. So we're teaching sections of this imposed requirement in all programs of college and career success. And so that's an issue. And that has been done without really looking at, yet anyway, any data um, uh, about how that new course, College and Career Success, is negatively or not negatively impacting the course loads of students, you know, and the programs of students. Does that detract from some of the really important electives that we've offered, for example? So those are, I mean, those are just a few things that that may be, you know, specifics that could help anchor the report.
Thanks, Jonathan. Yeah, I think I can summarize that. But I think it's lack of strategy and structural incoherence. I think that's your major point here.
I see
Indeed.
Lois and then Mike's hands up.
Lois?
Sorry, I was muted. I just want to add on a bit to what Jonathan said about the online classes and classes in general. I see a number of students who are taking a course at Norwalk and a course at Gateway and a course at Quinnebog and a course at Tunxus. And so they're taking courses all over the place at the same semester. So they really don't have any support structure within them. And they continue to do that, and they have no support whatsoever, because nobody is now responsible for that particular student, or that student that isn't responsible, that can't talk to one individual about all of these courses they're taking. And this is not a benefit to our students. And I also see the growth of online, which I think for community college students is not necessarily a very good thing.
Thanks.
You want me to go next?
Who is next?
Colleen, it's Mike, I think.
Yeah, Mike. go
Yeah,
ahead.
so first of all, I'm sorry I was late for the meeting. I had doctor's appointments. I like all these, I agree with these concerns. I'm just wondering, David, if in the interest of rhetoric, it might be better to ask the questions and then answer them that can they be answered well, and say yes, and then put in the questions with all the no's. Because I'm just afraid they're not going to, by the time they get to the third page and each one is answering no, I'm afraid they're not going to read it or continue to read it. And it might be rhetorically more effective for them to see how these questions could be answered. So, you know, like we raise the questions, then we say, can these be answered? Yes. And then you have your 10 or 12 answers to that, 9 answers. And then say, what won't work is this. I don't know if people want to reconsider that, but I just think when they're going to be in, you know, they're a bit, you know, they're in opposition, you know, just how do you win over a reluctant audience? Probably not by saying no to them.
Well, I think what can be done without a major restructuring of this is in the introductory section, to take your point and say, we're going to ask a number of questions and we're going to give the answers no. However, we also have the following proposal to make.
Yeah,
and therefore, you know, indicate that there is, in fact, later on a positive proposal.
Right.
Move it to the beginning.
That's
But
better
I think I can correct that with minimum changes.
But I think you could still do minimum changes even if you put the your last stuff where you say, can we take measures to resolve these problems? If you brought that up on the first, after the 6 problems or the 5 problems, and then just said, can we resolve this, and gave your 9 answers, and then say, I think that is still not a major restructuring. It just, I mean, and it's not a difficult restructuring, but it moves all our answers up to the front. So at least they see them first. And then I would say, you know, will this work? You know, will your answers work? No, because, and then have that come later. I think it's, you know, they'd be more interested in hearing, I mean, they might disagree with our answers, but at least it's a constructive approach to those problems. Whereas we by saving that constructive approach till the very end, I'm just afraid they won't even consider it. But again, this is just me as an English professor. I don't know whether people want to consider that. I don't know if anybody else has any thoughts about that, but I just have found that it's hard to get people to pay attention when or they pay attention better when the constructive stuff comes first.
Mhm.
But you shouldn't do that just because of me. I kind of throw that out there for some other people to probably comment on and say whether that's a good idea or not. But anyway, I do fully, David, this is really thorough and hard work, and I really appreciate it. The only other thing we might add is that raising of tuition that they did at the right at the end of the year, and the fact that there was, just like Brendan talked about, no response to their resolution. There was no response to our resolution either about the raising of tuition being the bad way to do it. So I don't know if you want to include that idea, but
Yeah, I will add that in.
yeah.
Okay, that sort of leads me on to the positive part, whether it's at the beginning or the end, but certainly in any case, it has to be indicated at the beginning. And so I've sort of focused, or we have focused on the systemness claim, which the chancellor has made. We discussed this at a board meeting at one point, because I brought it up, that it wasn't a word in the Oxford English Dictionary, but that the National Association of System Heads was putting it forward. And it's basically a formula for over-centralization and for command and control by the system head. That's essentially what they're after, and it's not for nothing that their association is called the National Association of System Heads. Instead, what I would like us to propose is the so-called system of systems approach. And here's an example which I use with people. Let's distinguish between an airplane and an airport. An airplane consists of various parts, none of which have the capacity for flight. Right? The fuselage, the wings, the motors, the landing wheels, etc. But put them together, you get that emergent property, and you have a pilot who commands and controls the plane. The parts are subordinate parts, and they can't function on their own. But if we look at the system, the CSUS system, each of the institutions is capable of functioning on its own. Take CCSU. Since there's 3 of us here, let's say that we take over, and for some reason, the system office in Hartford disappears. Well, CCSU can recruit students, educate students, and graduate them. They can hire and tenure faculty. They can contribute, the institution contribute to knowledge and to the economic and social development of the state, all on its own. Ditto for all of the other 5 institutions. So we are not just a system with systemness, right, and a command and control structure from the top, but rather we are what's known in terminology in engineering now as system of systems. You have a system composed of systems which on their own are autonomous and self-sufficient, but that you get some better functioning in ways that need to be defined by coordinating them together. And I give 2 examples: complex engineering systems, and also joint military operations of the U.S. military. They've been using system-to-system concepts, and it's well developed in the literature. So the comparison would be, we're not an airplane, we're an airport. And in an airport, you have many different individual systems. You have the various airlines and their ticket passenger personnel. You have the food services, you have security services, you have rail maintenance service, etc., etc. And you have a manager who coordinates all of that, but does not command and control it. And that's the basic misconception that we find at the system office. They continually are looking for this command and control structure. We saw it with the Ojakian administration, and we're seeing it now with the Chang administration. And so what I believe we should propose, and this is the explanation here, is a system approach, right? And that would diminish the role of the system office to one of assisting and advising, very similar to what the Faculty Advisory Committee does, the various institutions, but not micromanaging them. And so that's developed in points 1, 2, and 3, with examples of, what we think are essential for the system office. So it should be, aggregating the financial needs and proposing a budget, an overall budget. It should look after policies which have to be common to all of the institutions, such as sexual harassment policy or computer security. It has a role to play in having an inventory of programs for the purposes of assessment and reporting. But it really shouldn't go much beyond that. And we talk about the role of the board, not as one of rubber stamping whatever the system office has proposed. I note that there has been some modifications to that, but not enough in recent times. But doing things like independently assessing the reports from the system office, criticizing them, modifying them, amending them, or even rejecting them, and looking after the assessment of the presidents to make sure that, in fact, the budgets are balanced, if that is the priority, and I think probably should be one of the priorities. And then we go back to the questions of respect for shared governance, respect for faculty control of curriculum and pedagogy, and then 2.7 and 8, which are more speculative than anything. I don't know if they should actually be included, but we did propose them. At this point, the system office has now been split into two. There's now the system office on Woodland Street in Hartford and the system office in downtown New Britain. That one looks after the community colleges. So what exactly is the system office on Woodland Street doing? Is it looking after the system office in New Britain? Is it focusing primarily on the universities, which need a lot less assistance and can do most of the information technology, for example, on their own? That needs to be redefined, but it's looking like they've really splitting themselves into two. And because the system as a whole, CSCU, has not been able to maintain the distinction between the colleges and the universities, and as Kalina pointed out, promote their missions, it may well be that either formally or functionally, the board should be split into two as well. And that's certainly a possibility. I think we're not making a specific proposal, but we're saying that should be a possibility to be considered. In which case, the 4 university presidents, along with the Senate presidents, could form some kind of a council, and they could assess how the board policies affect their sector. Similarly, for the college sector of CT State and Charter Oak. Again, that's more of a conjecture, but it does seem to be sort of a consequence of this idea of having split the system office into two. Anyways, I'll stop there. So basically, systems approach, respect for shared governance and faculty control of curriculum and pedagogy, and the possibility of formal or functional splitting of the system. Mike?
Yes, I had just one other thought, David. Thank you for all that. When your third paragraph that begins with, we had hoped that with the new system, I think a second sentence might be helpful there.
Where are we? Sorry.
I'm sorry, the third paragraph of the report.
Oh,
We had hoped.
yes.
I thought a second sentence. I think the one thing that we all have to be kind of happy about was Chancellor Chang's request for the money for the legislature. And I thought before we talk about the disappointment, we might just say that hope was reinforced by Chancellor Chang's request for whatever the amount was to the legislature and the governor for improving or for maintaining quality quality education for CSCU students.
Mm-hmm. That's on page 1.
Yeah, that would be right after you said we had hoped, and then that hope would be reinforced, but then we are disappointed by the results. But I think we should acknowledge that nobody, since I've been here, nobody's ever asked for that much money for the system from the legislature, and I thought that was a really good. I had hoped that was going to mean a lot more than it did.
But I differ with you a little bit on this one, Mike, because I think that by asking for too much, they placed themselves in a position where they in fact got back too little.
Maybe.
So I'm not sure that it's a virtue. The virtue part of this, you could say, was that they were trying to really reach for the top, as it were. But the fact of the matter is that if you don't justify your request, and they really didn't, you're just setting yourself up for failure, and that's what they got.
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure how to include your particular formulation. I'd have to get back to you on that.
Okay, I'm fine, whatever you, I mean, again, I appreciate you doing this. It was just a thought. So, thank you.
Others? Linda?
So, oh, sorry, I should have turned on my volume. This is just, it's probably minor, but when you do talk about that proposal for money, you mentioned in there that it tripled Charter Oak's budget. I don't recall that. No, I haven't read it since then, so maybe you have a better recollection
I
of
think it
it
was
than me.
2.7.
But I just,
It
I
was a
don't,
tremendous
seems like I
increase.
would recall it, our budget going up that much.
I'll double check it. And in fact, if I can find it on my computer before the end of the meeting, I'll show it to you. But I'll double check that.
It wasn't successful, Linda, but it did propose to increase that budget significantly.
I remember it wasn't successful, and I remember that it seemed like they might want us to do some projects or something. I just don't remember our budget going up, but
Yeah.
May I offer a conjecture here? I think
Yeah.
what they were thinking of at one point was transferring online programs to Charter Oak from the universities.
Mhm.
Because I know that at one point that had been suggested to me by one of the system office leadership, and I had said I thought that was not a good idea. In
Mhm.
fact, a bad idea, because it's part of those online programs are part of the programs of the universities themselves, the offerings of the university themselves. Plus, I mean, there'd be definite financial negative financial impact. When I asked another time a system office leader why the increase, the response was, well, they were thinking of consolidating all of the instructional design at Charter Oak of the 4 universities, the community college, and so forth. And I again said I thought that was not a good idea, because in fact, at least some of the universities have their own instructional design department. So I don't know if that helps in explaining why they wanted to increase the budget. That's the only things that I've heard.
Mhm. Um, and I think that is, you know, to speak to the last point, right? The CSU 2030 was disappointed in that I think we had offered more than one suggestion, right? Incremental increases that might be reasonable and justifiable, or an analysis of the aims of the state to educate its students and then a costing of that. And the problem with CSU 2030 is, like, even now we are speculating as to why the budget was going to be increased that much, right? Like, there was no justification. That was the problem. So just not in principle. I have one, just maybe one sentence suggestion for answer number 4, where the recommendation is that the board is more critical of the system office. And I think I just want to acknowledge that there seems to be just a lack of, there needs to be an information source. And I always wonder, right, that before the Office of Higher Ed was supposed to have a different function, it was part of this whole board. And there was UConn disappeared, everything split. You've told me about this, David. I was not part of this, but it is interesting that we have a board that relies on the very system office it's supposed to oversee for every piece of information. And I have seen, there is some frustration, and there's a question of, like, can board members spend the time it would take to investigate all of this stuff, or is there some additional support that they might need, an independent source of information, something? Because it seems to me that we want them to be more confident and more critical, but we also need them to be able to have the information to do that. And we try to convey as much as we can, but it's nobody's full-time job to do so.
Yeah, we originally had a little section on the demise of the Department of Higher Education,
Yeah.
which was initially incorporated into the Board of Regents
Mhm.
when UConn was supposed to also be part of it. UConn
Yeah.
immediately dropped out, and that left the Department of Higher Education at a board meeting that I remember attending in 2012, approving graduate programs at UConn because it was coming from the Department of Higher Education.
Mhm.
that got transformed into an office, was removed from the board. And then at one point they said, oh, they're going to take a holiday for a couple of years from assessing institutions in the state. And that's, of course, when Stone Academy went belly up because nobody had been checking what they were doing.
Right.
So that's a problem, but I think we can add something.
Yeah,
That they
it
may
could be
need
just
to
as
have
simple like
their own service
right,
to provide some of the information,
right.
or to use whatever there is residually left in the Office of Higher Ed.
Right, yeah, that they need an independent source that perhaps was initially meant to be provided by the Department of Higher Ed. Because it is unique, I know certain boards do that when you're just, over one institution or something like that, you don't have the level, the absence of transparency that we have. We have two big block grants and funding for Charter Oak. The Charter Oak stuff is not as confusing, but those two big block grants with many institutions and a system office, nobody knows where the heck anything is going. And it's very labor intensive to track it.
Final words? If not, would somebody move approval of the report with the amendments that have been specified and which I will incorporate into it?
So moved.
Second?
You need a second, yeah.
Can I second if I'm not a voting member?
Yeah.
Okay,
point.
I second.
I'll second if anything. And thank you, David, for putting the time into this and structuring it so well.
Thank you so much, David. It's great.
Yeah. Are we ready for, is there any discussion before we vote beyond the review we just did? Okay. Let's go backwards like we do. Is anyone opposed to approval of the report to the legislature with the edits that we just discussed and David confirmed? Okay, are there any abstentions?
You should ask those in favor as well.
I will, I'll get there. I guess, sure, fine. You're right, I was gonna skip it. Are there any abstentions? Okay, all in favor?
All right.
Aye. By process of elimination, I believe that's unanimous.
Aye.
All right, thank you all.
Well, that concludes my contributions to the board.
Uh-huh.
I hope at some point you'll make me an emeritus member so I can attend your meetings in the future.
Just about 3 items from now, for sure.
Oh, I see.
Okay. All right, so the next thing is the OPM study. We mentioned it already, and I think all that you said, David, was about all that there is to say at the moment. We were contacted in December. The suggestion was January 9th. I made a written request that it not be January 9th because we are not, well, at the end of December, it was a couple weeks away, because so many of us are away, faculty are off contract. It was not changed. So there is a commitment from the folks, and actually, David, can you stop sharing? David? Can you stop sharing for a moment just so I can see folks in case someone says.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yes, I totally forgot this. Hang on. Stop.
So, from system office, we've been told that they'll communicate with NCHUMS, who is the agency company contracted by OPM to do this study, and make sure that we have a virtual date because they were only here in person for a certain amount of time. Now that we're back on contract. That's the only information I have so far. We don't have a schedule. I will probably reach out to them directly if we don't get this. And I do find it interesting or strange that it's all being scheduled by the system office itself, but you know, whatever. So that's where we are with that. I'll make sure that we have another update by the time we meet again. Any questions or anything? All right. Okay, so on to, where are we? Okay, I'm looking for my update for the next thing. Ah, there it is. Okay, so can we move on to FAC elections?
Can I just ask a quick question about NCHEMS?
Sure.
So the record, I believe, shows that OPM canceled their RFP.
Uh-huh.
Uh,
In October?
Yeah, well, I don't know when the cancellation was. I think it was a little, not sure when the cancellation was, but that specified the scope of work. And so, like, is there any documentation of what NCHEMS has been asked?
Not that has been shared with us, but that's a good question. I think we should ask when we are scheduling.
Okay, thanks. I mean, it all should be public, it all should be FOIAble, so,
Right.
but yeah, I do wonder exactly what questions they're supposed to be answering.
Yeah.
Whether those have changed from the original questions.
Right. And Pam, you've been I think scheduling some of this stuff. Do you have anything you could share here?
Kalina, I have just simply been asked to schedule a few meetings. Beyond that, I don't know what scope or scope of work is for NCHEMS.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
All right. So, okay, elections. Do you want me to take this, Jen, Lois?
Yeah,
So,
sure.
Yeah, sure.
so there have been some struggles with getting all of our reps elected. Western has not yet elected their representative for FAC. I know that they're on it. And there are a couple other things. I mean, the community colleges are still figuring out what their local governance is. So I know that I know Carmen, there was some question of how to do it at Capitol, but now you're scheduled for the 30th. Naugatuck Valley, it was my understanding, did not have functioning local governance until I got an update this week that they now have a chair. So I'm going to reach out to them. What I think we came up with when we met yesterday to figure out how to navigate this is that typically, if we had been functioning as usual, this would be the meeting where we would ask for nominations for chair and vice chair, and the next meeting we would vote on it. We want to kick it forward just one more meeting so that when we do chair and vice chair, we will be able to have all of our reps present and able to be nominated, right? So that means that we're going to ask for a hard deadline from all of the institutions to get us their elects by February 8th. Oh, okay, great. Apparently Capital has gotten it done. So we just have a couple of colleges. Northwestern, I think, has a brand new governance chair. And unfortunately, I'm rushing them to do this, so hopefully they can do it. But if they can get the elects by February 8th, then we can run, then we will have all of the names by our next meeting, February 9th, and can do elections, nominations for chair and vice chair at our February 9th meeting. We will run the second part of the community college election at that time, like right after, sometime around the 9th to the 11th, right? And sometime after that, so that we figure out who's voting an alternate from the community colleges. And then on March 8th, we can vote for chairs, or we might want to call a special meeting a little bit sooner than that just for the vote. Because the first meeting of the board this year is February 29th. And if, you know, there are multiple candidates, we want to know who's on the board before that. So that's the plan moving forward. Any thoughts or concerns or suggestions?
Can that vote
Anything?
be electronic?
Which vote?
The vote for the chairs.
Um, we usually do it together. Let me think about this. I believe that we have never done an electronic vote before because of the public meeting requirements. That if we're going to vote on something, we have to post it publicly, meet, and have it accessible. So we usually just meet for like 5 minutes, even if we then vote on it electronically. And yeah, thank you, Pam. Go ahead.
Yes, Kalina, the board bylaws for all committees for the full board do not allow for email or proxy voting yet.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, thank you. Yes, so it'll have to be just a quick meeting. But we'll try to, we can be very flexible since it'll be just the vote. And hopefully make it so that we can all be there if we need it. And if we decide that it's important, we could decide that next month, I believe, right? Depends on what happens between now and then. Anybody else want to jump in
Thanks
on
for
that?
that update. Did
Yeah.
you mention the 150 word piece?
Oh, that's right. So I've been contacting a lot of folks, but yes. So members of the community college who have been elected will need to get us the 150 word bio / statement for the ballot for the second part of the election, also by February 8th.
I think Brendan has a hand up.
Yeah, Brendan, is that still or?
Sorry, that's an old hand.
Okay.
We'll turn it off. Sorry.
Okay. Sound good?
That sounds good. I'm still available Monday morning if you want to get any
Okay,
help with those
great.
forms.
Thank
But I
you.
can contact you outside of the meeting. Thanks.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And I'll say so typically this is an even year. So in even years, the CSU chair is the chair of the body, and the community college chair is the vice chair. And our terms are wrapping up. I'm happy to set up chair the next meeting to get us there, and hopefully sooner rather than later, we will have official chairs and vice chairs as of next meeting. So does that sound acceptable to everyone? Okay, I'll hold on till we make it official. Now that takes us to emeritus status. So the reason I am holding on is that David has not only finished his term as chair, but he is no longer Central's official representative. It's now Mark Jackson with an alternate of, is it Mary Collins? And
Yes.
yes, and we'll do official
that's right.
introductions at our next meeting. But 1 second, sorry. Oops. Okay. I would like to make a motion that we consider granting David emeritus status if he will have us. I think he will. And just say, David has served 4 years as chair of FAC, as ex officio on the board, as a member of its finance and infrastructure committee. He has never missed a meeting. I don't think he's ever even spaced out in a meeting. He has been all in for 4 solid years. And a couple of those years have been objectively among the most difficult in higher ed, in memory. And, he is thorough in his reporting, in his analysis, in his contributions to those meetings, our meetings. It's highly likely that the average duration of a given finance committee meeting has doubled due to his contributions alone. He's been alliterative even. I'm very proud to say he is in his C phase currently, right? Command and control, and what are the good ones?
Communicate and consult.
There we go, right? He calls out nonsense when he sees it, and has been a strong and consistent voice of truth in very uncomfortable situations and meetings. He is responsible for some of the few wins that we're able to count over these years. The vaccine policy study group that produced some reports that I'm really proud that we were able to contribute to the board, for example. And we've been really lucky to have had the benefit of your 30 plus years of active involvement in CCSU and in the system, David. As faculty, as department chair, as governance, as director of the Peace Studies program, serving on system committees and task forces that provided horror stories that I've heard a few times now, but also provided insight into distinctions and details that might have completely blown past us had you not explained, their meaning. So your documented history of the system is about as thorough as it gets. It's the authoritative source. So we need you to stick around a bit if you can. And I want to personally thank you for the work you've done, and also for just becoming one of my best friends, and a great partner to go through this with. So I move that we consider that. Lois, I see a hand. Mark, I see a hand.
I second.
Great.
Darn, I was hoping to have the honor of seconding.
I beat you
Oh.
to it.
Since I'm his alternate and he has made my 2 years as an alternate extremely boring. Because even when David was on sabbatical, he still came to these meetings.
Mm-hmm.
So
All in. All
double
right.
second.
Great. All right. And shall we vote? All in favor?
Yeah, let's call the question. I'll call the question. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Any opposed? And any abstentions? All right, David. You're stuck with
Well,
us for
thank
life.
you, and
Thanks, David.
I am now officially older, if not old. I came to CCSU when I was 40, and I've been here 34 years. So you can do the calculation. And I've just gotten, I think, too old to continue doing this, and I need to transition to do some other things. But I will be available to assist, to advise and assist is the terminology at your request. In the last few years, I've had the occasion to work with some interesting people. I worked with Ralph Nader on a community bookstore in Winstead. That was extremely interesting, and he was certainly a unique individual to interact with on a regular basis. I worked with Ned Lamont for over 10 years on public policy activities at CCSU, and that was a very positive experience. But I think I benefited most by working with Kalina Sasanker. If you remember at that meeting in February of 2020, when we were each proposed as co-chairs for the universities and for the community colleges, I had never heard of you before or met you before. And I just remember thinking to myself, oh my gosh, another philosopher. There's going to be 2 of us. That's going to be interesting. And it's worked out extremely well. So I want to thank you in particular, and the rest of you for putting up with my long explanations and overly wordy expositions. But I will be available to help as best I can. And I think that there are significant things that remain to be done in terms of defending the interests of public higher education in the state, and all the other things We put them in our report, so I'm not going to repeat it. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Oh, and by the way, thanks to Mark Jackson and Mary Collins, because it's really nice to know that both the CCSU rep and the alternate are going to be on regular attendees at the meetings. That will really reinforce the reports that we can get back, and also the participation of CCSU at the FAC.
That's great. Yeah. Thanks. And before we move on to community college news, I just want to, again, because we mentioned you all, acknowledge that, I think Mary and Kat, these are your very first meetings. Mark and James and Lori, you've been here before, but we haven't, never fully in your roles, and we haven't really done introductions. I want to, hopefully next month we will all have our roles and we can go through and really get to know each other and introduce ourselves. So we'll get there. So looking forward to properly making those introductions. All right, item 9, community college news. There is nothing official that I have to say. I'm hoping we can collect some concerns. I'll mention some speculations and we'll go from there. How are things?
Pretty bad.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, some of the things I mentioned before, I could provide a few more items for the list if you'd like.
Sure.
Yes, I mean, just maybe just also to review too. I think one of the most pressing issues, especially just starting the semester, is the scheduling and how we are now pitted against each other. The campuses are very much pitted against each other in a process that often does not seem fair, or just lacks coherence. We're seeing many kind of bread and butter courses that are no longer able to run. Introduction to Humanities, for example, is a traditional course, which was packed every semester, is no longer seemingly a viable course. Hearing from human services people, computer, just the computer science degrees, Introduction to Software, which is their basic introductory course, is not running at Quinnebog. I mentioned also the concern to pushing everything online, that the natural, just the way everything is set up, there's going to be more and more proportionally more classes online, which doesn't serve all students well and doesn't serve our programs well. There are also new prerequisites to some courses, according to some people who spoke at the last Quinnebog Senate. I don't have the specifics. I'm not sure which courses they're referring to, but this is another barrier to enrollment, which adds to other barriers to enrollment that are imposed. So, for example, the dropping of students who have the $500 balance, the advising of students who are in academic probation and not allowing them to take more than 2 courses when they're trying to make a comeback. Some of whom can. It's not a great idea for everybody. Sorry, I'm just looking for my notes here that I took at our recent Senate meeting. Again, another concern, which it seems to be a drag on programs and on student persistence is the college and career success classes. Difficulty for full-time faculty finding their full loads. So there are questions that have been asked that haven't really received answers. So, for example, and this might need further discussion, but being able to teach classes on other campuses to achieve a full load. So for example, a full-time faculty member sometimes has to bump an adjunct, unfortunately, at their local campus to be able to achieve their full load. We have people who are not even really able to teach in their discipline, but there are courses in their discipline being taught by part-time faculty on other campuses. Or is it possible to take students from a full class at another campus to ensure, a foundation course for a full-time faculty member achieving a full load? So those are just a few.
Okay. Thank you. Anyone else? And I'll just add as the the opposite side of what you said, added prerequisites that work as a barrier. I believe there was an issue of missing prerequisites from certain math courses that also served as a barrier. It, not something I know very well, but something I heard raised recently that I think might deserve some conversation down the line. Mike.
For us at Northwestern, it's kind of a double-edged sword with some of these things, and I consider some of these transition items, but I don't know if they're going to persist. I hope they don't. Small things like inclement weather, snow, ice, etc. You'll see, we have a pretty close criminal justice group throughout our community college system here, and talking to different people and looking on, like, let's say Tunxus's website, they would have the scroll on the top. This seems very small, but it caused a lot of headaches. Scrolling, classes close 4 o'clock today, or we're going to open at 10 o'clock tomorrow. And we didn't have that at Northwestern. So I asked my dean about it, and he said, oh, the person who's in charge of that, I guess, didn't do it, or they couldn't figure it out. I don't know if you talked about this earlier, because I couldn't be here for the whole meeting, but if you get the text messages on your phone or saying that the school's closed or whatever, I got 0 messages, another faculty staff member got 4, things like that. I mean, I know these things could be ironed out, but we didn't have the problems before. But the bigger issues for us, I would say it's more anecdotal evidence, but I'll bet you that there's a lot of this thought process shared, I wouldn't say throughout the system, with others there. Some, like, I think Jonathan talked about it, it's almost like, I would hope it'd be inadvertently pitting one college against the other. So one college may put together multiple online courses for students to jump on board. What was the number last semester? About 23% took multiple colleges since CT State started for the fall. I'll bet you that number jumps into the 40s or 50s for the next one. So there's good and bad with that. I think there's good and bad because you have the opportunity, if, like, we're a small college, right? I only have a couple of adjuncts and myself. And if you need another course or a different course, you can go somewhere else. Awesome. But if you kind of get, if one college just kind of poaches, I'm laughing, but it's serious, and they do these onlines, then we might lose them, or you lose the identity of the college. I don't know if you share these viewpoints or the autonomy of the college. And I'm starting to see, going into this semester here, I can't quite tell who's mine and who's not, but I could kind of tell overall that I'll bet you, I would say 40% are quote unquote not my students. Having said that, my numbers are up because I cross-listed. Anyway, there's good and bad with that, but that's how I'm seeing that. And the last one, well, there's a few more, but the bigger ones are, I personally have a good relationship with my Guided Pathways advisor, with our campus lead and all that, but not everybody has the same experiences. And I don't think either the training or the information giving to the GPAs is the same, or handled differently. So there's still confusion amongst the students. Well, who's my advisor? Is this GPA or is it a faculty advisor? That type of thing. But and then and the math courses, there's some issues with that, but that's not really my domain. But those are some of the things that I've seen through the new CT State merger on our end at Northwestern.
Thanks. I have a few things that I know are on my radar that to me are either governance or structure issues. For example, the missing prereqs with math, that's one thing. That seems like an internal college thing. But the way that it was handled on a mass scale and the extent to which it it affected and disadvantaged both the students who didn't have the prereqs and the students who are in the class now with a bunch of students who were not prepared for the course. The way that it was handled, to me, it's unclear to me that it should have been handled in such a broad way. I don't think faculty would have recommended that. So there's that. CPOS continues to linger, but it's progressing. I believe it's being looked into at CT State Senate. There's going to be a committee, so it's being addressed finally. I don't know if satisfactorily yet, but it's getting there. There was an issue that came up. I have to confirm it, but it appears that there's been a lot of disputes about course modality. And apparently, so there are, arguments to say that when you approve a course, the modalities that faculty check should matter. Apparently, those modality checkboxes have been removed from the course approval documents. Again, this is what I've heard, and I don't want to check it, but that then takes the question of modality entirely out of the hands of faculty, which seems to be an issue. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, just a brief note on that. I'm not sure about the changing of the forms, but even in the old forms of the forms we were looking at last semester, I think that there was a language that CT State reserves the right to offer any course in any modality. So they were already a moot point, the checking of the forms.
That's right. As of, last semester, whatever was checked would be a faculty recommendation, but management could do what it wanted. And at this point, there isn't even the potential, the opportunity to make that recommendation formally on that form. So that seems to be an issue. And then again, the question of reporting structure, particularly in one example that I have in mind of IT completely bypassing college leadership, so that even if you reach out to the college president, you cannot resolve issues that directly affect your course that involve IT. They can be subverted, and that seems problematic. So those are the ones on my radar in terms of, is the structure working, is governance working, and that does seem to be the domain, because this is about design. It would be nice to see whether there's going to be progress there. Lois, and then Carmen.
All right, well, number one, as far as governance is concerned, as far as I'm concerned, it's not working because we're not giving out any information about when there are meetings, what the agendas are, if there are any agendas, if there are minutes, what are they, anything. We have nothing. So shared governance, it doesn't exist as far as I'm concerned. On something else, I was checking yesterday on a course a student was taking, and in one place I looked, it said that English 101 was a prerequisite for that course. And in another place that I looked, it said English 101 was a co-requisite for that course. So there's still all kinds of problems with the written stuff, the catalog and everything else. So I don't know how students even figure any of this stuff out. And the other thing I'm just going to bring up is, because I want to know how we can do this, how we can get this. My understanding is about the middle of January or so, they had to submit an update to NECHI somewhere around the 14th, and I'm looking at the 14th was a Sunday, so it's obviously not Sunday, not the 14th, but somewhere around that date, they had to submit an update. We have seen nothing of this. How do we get our hands on it?
Do you know of anyone who's asked?
Sorry?
Do you know of anyone who has asked?
I don't even know who to ask.
All right. Okay, that it, Lois?
Yeah.
Okay, and sorry, I just noticed that I missed something on my list before I get to you, Carmen. Speaking of structure, because you talk about governance, I continue to be a little not confident about whether it's just that I'm not engaged enough in the academic process and it's new and I'm confused. But I do feel like the the process with all the different committees and deans, I'm not quite sure what they do, and multiple ways apparently of getting courses approved. If it doesn't get approved here, you can take it to this committee instead. I'm not clear on that the academic governance process is what it is and how it works, how it really works. And I don't know, I know that I'm not alone. I just don't know if it's a lack of familiarity or if it really is as incoherent as it appears to be. Lois.
It is as incoherent as it appears to be, because I know a department chair who here who wanted to bring back a program that was kind of blown up by CT State, and his advisory committee and faculty and so forth have said to him that the old program would have benefited the students much better than the new program. It was tighter, it was whatever. So he brought it to the first committee, whatever that is, I even forget, SACC, as to whatever it is. And it got voted down. So he went to, it got voted down. So he went to the school dean and spoke to that person and said, well, how do we need this program? How do we go about it? And the guy said, the school dean said, well, all you have, just take it to the next committee. You don't have to worry about what happened in the first committee. Just take it to the next committee. And if they wrote it down, just take it to the next committee after that and just keep going.
Mm.
So yeah, it's not working.
Carmen?
Yeah, just a couple things here. So just to clear, yeah, so the first committee is the SDC, the Discipline Committee, and supposedly anything that's passed is supposed to go to the SAC committee, which is more the actual whole departments. And then if anything passes, that goes to Curriculum Committee. And I don't really, in Curriculum Committee, we just had a long meeting today. I don't really notice things that are just getting right to the committee that hasn't gone through that proper channeling. So I will say that. And then just, I have been saying at every single meeting, this information is not getting out to the colleges. So finally, I got our minutes in like Word. So I sent that our minutes of the November, December Curriculum Congress meetings, which had all these different course approvals and program approvals, to the college so that everyone could see it. But like, for instance, when there's things on the agenda and all these proposals, it's all connected to SharePoint. And if you're not admitted to SharePoint, you can't look at that. So there still is a barrier there. And so people are going to have a hard time looking to see what are the proposed changes to see if they can have comment on that. And so I've been talking every single meeting, Mike Stefanowicz saying, this has to be more open. People have to see what's being presented here. It can't just be the people on these committees. This should be open up to all. So still working on that. I do know that they did say that the deans of these different departments should be sending out the minutes to all the to all the departments or to their specific department. And then finally, there was a vigorous discussion today at the Curriculum Congress meeting about modality. And Mike Stefanowicz basically said that because we said that basically these course outlines are developed by faculty and should be respected. And for some reason, Mike Stefanowicz just said, but the modality is a recommendation, that they look at it as a recommendation. And, and I just said, listen, science spent months and months going through all these course outcomes and hours on each course outcome about what modality should be allowed. And it's no different than, say, adding a prerequisite and then just willy-nilly changing it, which isn't done. So there was still, we didn't really they were actually thinking about forming a subcommittee about modality, but then a lot of people thought that wasn't properly be done at the Curriculum Congress meeting. And I just, the modality thing, I have serious problems with it. I just think there were so many classes that are online, and there's many people who just want that. So it's just, I don't even see how this ever going to be resolved. But personally, I feel like it's leading to inequity within the community college students. They can take so many classes online, and the four-year schools really don't offer that. And I'm really concerned how that's going to move forward for our students. But anyway, that's just my other opining there on that area. That's it. Thanks.
Yeah. And just to clarify, so Mike Stefanowicz is he has been newly appointed as there are these two new positions that are executive deans, and among his responsibilities is faculty governance or shared governance. I believe this is under his purview now. He has been, oh goodness, I don't know what his role has been, but he's been facilitating these meetings and CT state governance for a while, and before that he was facilitating the Students First from its inception. So he's sort of been around in this governance question for a very long time, but that's who he is. James?
Yeah, to add to the modality, that's another thing about it too. Because I'm the math, like I teach math, so and I've been into many of the, rewriting the curriculums and when we have to change all the course outcomes and so on and so forth. So at first it was like a recommendation. That's what they said with the modality. But now which create like a problem for the 4 years institution like an UConn and so on and so forth in certain math courses. For instance, let's just say Calculus 1. I don't know if that is being resolved yet because I have never heard it's being resolved. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. For example, let's just say some student takes Calculus 1, right? UConn will not accept it if they do it online. But do you see what I'm saying? And that's really a very powerful course, a heavy course. For example, Calculus 2 course, if they do this course online, like in a fully online environment, there is some transferring institution that will not accept it. Like Eastern will not accept it, or I don't know if they change. I mean, I don't know if those other institutions change because they never talked about it. It stopped right there. But I know that it becomes a very roadblock for us, for our student that's taking mathematics. There is certain courses they do take in not being transferred. So for instance, I have a course right now, I'm teaching online right now, but we make it like an air one where it's like a live remote, but all the assignment is online. But I believe there is one student that wants to transfer. That was before the semester start. One student that was gonna be transferred to another institution. I forgot the name of it. And then she was like, are we gonna have some assignments coming done, like some tests coming on campus? And I told her that no, all the assignments gonna be online. So as a result, she had to drop from the class because the where she was gonna transfer that course, they would not allow it because all of the assignment is online. So that is a little problem in the math side. I don't know about the other classes, but I know some classes like microbiology, that with lab, some institution is not taking it if it's not being done on campus. Okay, so I know some courses on the science side, especially in the math, a lot of our math courses, universities are refusing to taking them because if they are fully online, they will take them if they're on ground. I don't want to say like they're not taking them.
Right.
They're taking them if they are being taught on ground.
Right.
But if it's like fully online, some of them are reluctant to take it. I don't know if that's
Right.
being resolved, but it's been stopped talking for a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
And then also sometime I will give you sometime with the modality.
Mm-hmm.
Some students are taking the modality, but they don't understand how the modality work, or they're being placed into the modality as a convenience, but yet they don't understand the requirement of the modality. And I feel like sometimes the advisors doesn't understand the modality, and it's like the information is not being consistent about how this modality, they need to really give like a pro and cons when the student is taking the modality. For example, if you're a transferring student, you really need to understand if you take a course online, there is a chance it might not transfer. But if you're a student that's just gonna graduate and get your 2 years, certificate or something like this, maybe that's something you can think of. Do you see what I'm saying? So that information needs to be really circling like with precise. I don't think like all of them have the same information.
That's true. That's true. And just to speak to the issues with the transferring, it's not just that transfer institutions are not being cooperative. Their concerns are with the outcomes and how you can reasonably achieve those outcomes in the way that Karma was talking about it, especially when you have science labs with science majors who need to be prepared for more advanced work that it has been a real obstacle to, and its faculty with whom that decision ought to reside, I would expect, but that has not been how it's been done thus far.
Oh yeah,
Wow.
definitely,
Yeah.
especially with the math, with the amount of algebra. Like I think the biggest concerns the four CSUs had at the beginning, it's like, do the student know a sufficient algebra to be into the STEM, pathway or something like that? Because when we did the prerequisite courses and everything. Now to go back to, I think Louis had mentioned that about like a student taking a course that was prerequisite somewhere, and then you can take it as a core requisite somewhere. I think it was in English class or something. So they still, I believe, like finalizing this, because we created those things called co-requisite courses where you can take the actual course with like a correct support. So as a result, like, and then at the same time, if you are already taking the prerequisite, you can go actually to the actual course. So I feel like there was like a little like a debating here. Things are not really settled down there, because this happened with math, for example. If a student take 137 at Asnantok, technically they are eligible to take pre-calculus, right? But now if somebody take college algebra, also eligible to take pre-calculus, but at the same time you don't need to take 137 in order to take this pre-calculus. You can just get a prerequisite where you have to go to college algebra and then do that correct all together without having to do 137. Do you see what I'm saying? In order to get to that, maybe just again, the information is not being shared. I feel like it's not being shared accurately with everyone. So it's just somebody knows something, some doesn't know something. And for example, me, I'm blessed. I know a few things because I take time to go to those meetings, regardless whether I'm being invited or not. I just show up. So I don't like really show up like because I wanna, vote or whatever, but I just show up because knowing that information it's good for me, compared to some of my colleagues that not knowing that information do impact, their judgment on that. So again, it's like the information is not being circulated and everybody doesn't have the same information.
Thanks, James. Mark?
Yeah, that this whole concept's been coming up a lot with the nursing department at CCSU, working with me in biology as far as the anatomy physiology courses, and very specifically of students doing online anatomy physiology. Not the lecture. The lecture is fine. The lecture can be done really well, but it's the lab. And nursing has been extremely concerned about students taking online labs because the nursing students cannot do good practice and even understanding where a vein is to do an injection. They believe without actually getting your hands on some actual tissue at some point and rolling a vein around in your finger and things like that. And so the nursing department is really insistent that they want all of their nursing students to have an on-ground laboratory, which is what we do at the university. We teach an online lecture in the summer, but we always do the online labs. So the concern with them is a large number of students started bailing to other colleges, including purely online colleges up in Massachusetts, instead of doing the online laboratory or the on-ground laboratories. And like I said, it's just not, they don't believe it's preparing for good nursing practitioners. The concern is, well, the way we're kind of handling it is once you're, a student at the university, you can take a class somewhere else, but you have to get permission in order to do so. And so the nursing department is saying that, well, yeah, you're supposed to come talk to your advisor and say, is that course appropriate? And we will try to look to see, is it actually an on-ground lab? That's what we care about. But the problem was last summer, there was some mix-ups in the registrar's office, and the registrar office just approved the transfer and just took the course without really talking to anyone in the departments about it. And so about 7 students got promised by the registrar that they can, in this case, it wasn't at one of the Connecticut State college ones. It was actually an online program up in Massachusetts that that was a mistake. And we're having to deal with that now. But that's one of the concerns that, you know, that just James made me think about.
Thanks. Shall we move on to if there are updates from universities? Okay. Is that a no?
That was, so I can chime in a little bit more for CCSU, because that was one that I just thought about because of this one. But of course, you probably know that we're adding a new school. So the
Right.
School of whatever, I don't remember what it's called, David.
I thought it was
Rehabilitation
Health
Sciences.
and Rehabilitation Services.
Yeah, so nursing, half of my department's being split and going into it,
Okay.
the anesthesia program. And it's not a terrible thing. It doesn't change a whole lot of stuff, but of course it does necessitate hiring a brand new dean. So adding a dean and a dean staff. But other than that, it's really the same stuff. But our consideration now in our Senate is that, you know, dawned on us that now it completely changes the dynamics of university committees and the way that the new departments are. There's going to be quite at least 2 departments that only have really 4 members in them. The phys ed department has been split so that now the exercise science portion is coming to this new school, but it's only like 4 faculty. So now you got to find a department chair. You have to find a senator. You have to find a curriculum rep. So everyone's going to be doubling up on their, you know, university service, while also trying to teach students. So, you know, we certainly raised that point at the time that the discussions were being made. But then it also dawned on us in the Senate, we're going to have to completely redo how we choose promotion and tenure committees and how we split that, because now we're going to have 5 schools instead of 4 schools. And so now you're divvying it up into certain committees, like, you know, promotion and tenure always has 1 full professor and 1 associate professor that's tenured. And now you're going to have a very small new school, and half of those programs are coming from the School of Education and Professional Studies. So that school's been cut in half. And we already had trouble finding enough people to serve on the sabbatical leave committees, the Senate, you know, the promotion, I mean, the planning and budget committees. So it's really diluting the pool and increasing the workload for faculty on university committees. You know, so it was one of the consequences of this. So that's going to be our Senate meeting Monday.
Thanks. Mike?
Mark, I just want to add to that. It not only makes more work for students, I mean, for faculty in small departments, but it means that small departments have certain schools, like professional schools, that have a lot more smaller departments than have a kind of a bigger representation at the Senate and curriculum committees. And that makes a difference too, because
Yes.
we're running into that at Southern. You know, they create these 3-person departments. Yes, it's a lot of work for those people, but they're mostly in the professional schools. And so the professional schools are sort of in the votes now. They sort of have a lot more to say about curriculum, which tends to be less arts and science and gen ed and more large programs. So I just thought you might want to bring that up at that Senate meeting. I think it's turned into a big problem that is not easily anticipated.
I'll bring that up, Michael, at the risk of having tomatoes thrown at me.
Yeah, right. That's true.
All right. And I know Brendan says key points already raised about Eastern. Anything else at Southern?
I think we have an interim president. I think most people like him. I think he's a good president, but he's interim. So, you know, we're concerned with Keystone situation with the search, how it's going to be handled. You know, sounds like it's going to be a lot different from the way it used to be handled, and I think we're gearing up to resist some of that. So we'll see.
Okay. Charter Oak, anything we need to know?
Sorry, it took me a minute to unmute. No updates that I can think of, thanks.
Okay. Except that y'all are winning by somehow managing to keep tuition flat, even though there are money issues. That's great.
You know, our student numbers are small as always, but they've gone up a little, so.
Cool.
By the way, there are some other Southern representatives here, actually 3 others, and they might have something to say about Southern. That shouldn't just depend on me. So thanks.
Yeah. Lori, Diane, Fu? Okay. Alrighty.
Nothing in the same.
Okay. So I'll say here, really quickly because Carmen just put that in the chat. FAC updates for meetings. Yes. So the calendar for our meetings for the year, we approved it in I think December, and it is actually, if you go on, you know, the BOR website, like BOR meetings and agendas or something like that, you can get the full, and I'll put the link in here right now, the full calendar of all BOR meetings right there. And our next one is February 9th. And I will say to those campuses who are still conducting elections, please communicate to folks who are running or who get elected, or just make sure that folks know that the next one is February 9th and they should plan to attend so that we can get things going. So, yeah. Yes, Carmen.
Yeah, so I just realized, so, you know, because the college senate meetings are also on Fridays. And so the new rep just told me, she says, I can't do the FAC because the college senate meets at the same time as FAC. And it's too bad.
Every time?
Well, I mean, because they only meet once a month, but if you're meeting every 2 weeks and February 9th is your first time, then I'm assuming the 23rd is the next one. And
No.
the college senate meets on the 23rd, and then of February, and the college senate meets, you know, the 22nd of March. So I didn't know if you guys coordinated the schedule, because you would think that people on the college senate, it would be nice for those people to also be on FAC.
So this is the problem with the CT State College Senate. You can't get access. We were talking about, you know, documents for the committees. You can't get access to the Senate agendas, calendar, none of that stuff. You can get after the fact videos of the meetings whenever they go up, etc. But that stuff is not conveyed well. So I don't know the dates. I think it might be on that website. But I don't think they should all clash. And I put the link to our dates right there in the chat. It's so the March meeting is March 8th, so that doesn't clash. April 12th, May 10th. They might not line up perfectly. I hope they don't, because I like sitting in on those meetings and, you know, entertaining myself. Lois.
How do you sit in on those meetings? Where do you get a link from?
Oh, I just harass my senators at my campus until they give me a link, but I don't have access to agenda or documents or anything else. So I'm just listening.
At least you have a link.
They'd have to download them and send them to me individually, because where those things are posted, we don't have access to.
But at least you get the link.
Yeah, but you really have to ask. There should be a better way, I think, of posting it publicly. Hopefully they'll facilitate it the way Pam facilitates us and Andrew facilitates us, so that, because it's a big college, to get that moving sometime soon. All right. I think here I am looking at the schedule instead of the agenda, but old and new business. Oh, go ahead, Mike.
This is sort of not old business. I just want to ask, if when David gives that report, and again, thank you, David, for your work on that. You'll send it to us, right? Because I'd like to share it with the whole campus.
Oh, yes.
Not just our Senate, not just our, and I would urge other schools to also share it with the whole campus, all the faculty anyway, and not just the faculty reps, because sometimes faculty reps don't necessarily get to everybody in their department or people in the department. So anyway, I just wanted to, I'm going to ask my Senate president to send it to everyone. And I guess I would encourage other people to do the same thing. I think it's very informative. A lot of people don't know the stuff that's going on. So
Yeah,
you'll send it to us, right, David?
yes, I will. I'll work on the amendments. I got them in my notes. There's 9 of them. And get it back to Kalina and to Brendan to make sure that that's exactly what they comprehended. And plus, I'll re-listen to the video, and then hopefully that should be available by midweek.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
And I'll send it to everybody here.
Yay. All right. Anything else before we go? Next meeting, February 9th. And anyone still doing elections, drop dead date, February 8th, please. Okay. Motion to, Andre's not here for the motion. Motion to adjourn. Anyone?
I'll move.
Or we
that
can
we
stick
adjourn.
around.
I second them.
All right. Have a great weekend. See you soon.
Thanks all.
I'll stop the
See
recording.
ya.
Have a great weekend.